I'm really excited to welcome our Zillow speaker today, Brad Stone.
Thank you.
He has been across the media over the past week with really favorable and a lot of coverage about his latest book, The Everything Store, about Jeff Bezos and Amazon. And we're going to talk about that, but let me read you a little bit more about Brad's bio before we get into it. So Brad Stone's a veteran business reporter covering technology in Silicon Valley over many years. For Newsweek, the New York Times, and today Bloomberg Businessweek. And just last week, he published the book that on a subject that hit close to home, Amazon. And so in The Everything Store, Jeff Bezos and the Age of Amazon, it takes us inside Amazon for an unprecedented look at the company's history, its brilliant, controversial, and infamously private founder, and the corporate culture of relentless ambition and secrecy that's never before been cracked. And that's a quote coming from the book. And so to write this, Brad got unprecedented access to people who know Jeff and know the company well, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Before we launch into it, though, I'm curious, in this room, how many people came here from Amazon before? How many do we have?
So could you all leave the room, please?
Yeah, right. And how many, just through your friends or whatever, have an idea or have heard about the culture at Amazon? So it's you know, here in Seattle, it's pretty well known, and would love to hear more about what you learned. So I guess, Brad, first of all, welcome. We're so excited to have you, and so excited to dig into this. And I guess start from the beginning. I mean, when did you get the idea for this? And you know, had you interviewed Jeff and talked to Amazon before, and sort of what brought you to this point?
Sure. Well, the very beginning is probably, I think it's the year 2001, and I'm a cub reporter at Newsweek, and Amazon is in sort of free fall. And I come to Seattle, I think it was my first or second time there, and I go to visit them at the old Pacific Medical Building. And the front lobby is like walled off because the Nisqually earthquake has just happened. So you got to kind of snake in through the back, and there's a big sign there warning of falling bricks, which I thought right away was like sort of the perfect metaphor for the company at the time. And over then the next 10 years, I covered Amazon for Newsweek, for the New York Times, now Bloomberg Businessweek. And I really watched as an incredible company sprouted from the near ashes of 2001. You know, going from 9,000 employees to 90,000 employees, the stock price through the roof, product categories going from, you know, a small selection at the time, books, electronics, toys, to the everything store. And not just retail, but Kindle, Amazon Web Services. About 2 years ago, as you all know, Walter Isaacson wrote a book about Steve Jobs. And it was an incredibly successful book. And I sort of thought to myself then, there have been Google books, there have been Facebook books, there have been many Apple books, and now a great Apple book, and yet no one really has told the incredible story of Amazon. And that's probably for a number of reasons. One, maybe by virtue of its location here in Seattle, but also obviously because Amazon, like many retailers, is sort of fundamentally quiet and secretive. It's not completely unique. Walmart is very secretive. Even Nordstrom's right here. As a journalist, I can hardly get, I'd love to go tell the Nordstrom story, but they're fundamentally quiet, and that's in part because, in retail, it's a very low-margin business. Kind of your perspective is your competitive advantage, and you don't want to make too much noise around what you're doing because people will copy you. Anyway, to make a long story shorter, I knew enough, and talking to Jeff probably a dozen times over those 10 years, that I actually had heard what his reflexive response was to anyone who asked to write a book about Amazon, and others had asked. It's too early to tell the Amazon story, which is sort of incredible when you think about how far they've come, that he still considers the journey to be only partially complete. So I didn't ask for permission, but after I had drummed up the proposal and gotten a publisher, I went and asked for forgiveness, and I told him what I was doing, and I was invited up to meet with him, and a short aside, as most of you probably know, Amazon's culture is very idiosyncratic, and all the meetings are started with 6-page documents called narratives. It's how Jeff just prefers to digest information. And so everyone sits in silence at the beginning of a meeting just reading. So I was, of course, very nervous to go and tell Jeff that I was doing this. And I prepared my own document. And for new product introductions at Amazon, they always write it in the form of a press release because the idea is you're going to start with what the customer sees and work backwards from that. So I did my own press release, and I presented it to him. And he when he saw what I was doing, he started laughing, the maniacal laugh. We had a good talk, and of course he said it was too early to write the Amazon story. But subsequently, he allowed me to talk to members of his family and approved many interviews with friends, and I talked to several Amazon senior executives, and then current and former Amazon employees up and down the ranks. Of course, drew from my many interviews with Jeff around mostly product introductions, even while I was writing the book. And the result is the book.
So while he himself didn't talk to you, it sounds like he opened up his network and I guess allowed them to talk to you, which is different, I think, than Walter Isaacson's.
Yeah, and of course that was a unique scenario. Jobs, tragically having a disease. I did talk to Jeff, but I was never an authorized account in that way because he's so sort of fundamentally secretive and forward-looking. When we talked, it was always about products.
So, there's much has been written about your book about kind of the deep dive into Jeff the person and the deep dive into Amazon the company and sort of how they interrelate. So I guess talk through that a little bit. And for those or most in the room, since the book is just out, who haven't read it, tell us more about Jeff the person, and then tell us how that created Amazon, the internal culture.
So when I first went to talk to Jeff about the book, he actually said, "Is this a book about me or is this a book about Amazon?" And I knew enough to know that the right answer was, "This is a book about Amazon, but you're the central character." And actually, as I dove deeper into the company, I sort of discovered that the question is a little bit unfair because Amazon is Jeff. I mean, I describe it in the book as scaffolding built around his brain. The entire company is tailored to how he thinks from the narratives onward, and he's just somehow been able to magnify or amplify his impact across now this incredibly diverse organization. So even areas that he's not very deeply involved in, he's selectively auditing throughout the year. And so really, as I started to talk to people, everyone's account of Amazon sort of springs from their interactions with Jeff. They really became inseparable. And I never wanted to really start the book with, Chapter 1, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Jeff Bezos is born to teenage parents. I wanted to start the book on Wall Street in the 90s where Jeff is a vice president at a hedge fund called D.E. Shaw. This is the hedge fund where the idea for Amazon springs up. But as I did more research, I began to kind of conclude that there's no accounting for this company. There's no biography of the company without a deep understanding of the man. Because, throughout the history, from the beginning when it's 3 guys in a garage, to 2001 when the earthquake has shut down the building, to today, it's relentless because he doesn't quit. Because he's pushed forward even when everyone around him has left, and when Wall Street doesn't believe in him, he has always believed in the vision of the everything store, and he pushes it forward. So to get back to your question, so in the book, I do start on Wall Street, but in the middle, I kind of take an intermission, and I describe how does someone, so relentlessly driven, how does this happen? I mean, he really is sort of at a different plane. And one of the more interesting stories that has gotten a lot of coverage, and I can't even explain this, it's far outside the purview of a business reporter, but like Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or Steve Jobs for that matter, or Lance Armstrong or John Lennon, he didn't know one of his biological parents, in this case his biological father. And the short story is that his mother was 17 when she had him and was married to a classmate. And the marriage didn't work out, and he left, and she remarried. This incredible Cuban immigrant named Mike Bezos, and Jeff took his name, and and they traveled the world. He was an executive at Exxon, but I always wondered in trying to fit together the pieces of how, this person, how Jeff Bezos happened, what happened to the biological father. And so as part of the story, I track him down, and to my surprise, he's running a bike shop outside of Phoenix, and he has no idea who Jeff Bezos is.
And you were the first person to ever track him down.
Right, and and in fact, in that regard, the same thing had happened with Steve Jobs. Crazily enough, it had happened with Steve Jobs' biological father too, that he didn't know. And I don't think that's an ingredient for good parenting to leave your child, but somehow it creates these driven, relentless executives who with a constant need to prove themselves.
So for you, a business reporter who's used to writing on companies and startups, to make this pretty startling discovery, how did that change your project?
That's a good question. How did it change? Well, it certainly changed how I thought about it, because you're writing a business book and you conceive of having a certain business audience, and now it made me in one sense more optimistic about it because I had this incredibly human drama at the center of it. On the other hand, it introduced a whole set of issues that were very sensitive and a little uncomfortable, definitely for me, that I really had no experience in handling, because then Ted, the biological father, wanted to get back in touch with Jeff and his mom, of course. Actually, I don't think there was a financial motive. He was genuine. It was like a moment of genuine emotion, where he was, had wondered about it his whole life and was very remorseful and regretful about how he had missed an opportunity. He didn't have any biological kids of his own. And, and then of course there was a huge kind of obligation on my part to at least, alert the Bezos family that this was coming. And Jeff had let me talk to his parents, so I was able to, kind of convey that message. So, on the one hand, I'd be lying if I said I didn't walk out of there, a little more hopeful for the book. But on the other hand, it did make things a little bit more complicated.
Were you passing on this information to Jeff for the first time?
Well, he knew. No, he knew. He did know that his biological father was out there and had said in previous interviews that he didn't really care.
But who he? Okay.
Yeah, but and actually his name was known. This was sort of one of the crazy things, is that there was a Washington Post reporter who wrote a profile of Jeff Bezos in, I think it was the year 2000. That was actually largely overlooked because it was at the time when everyone was dismissing Amazon and its prospects. And he actually had a line in there that said, somewhere out there is this man, and who knows if he even knows who his son is. So no, it was known. His name was on the birth certificate. And and then I also just felt the need to sort of justify why I had pulled on this thread. And what I sort of ultimately concluded, and maybe it's a rationalization, but I'll tell you, is that if you change the world, as Jeff Bezos has, people want to know where you came from. And partly because the family is so private, there had never been that full accounting.
So you talked about when you first came here in '91, and the way Amazon was thought of then versus how it's thought of now. That was in the early years of them being public, and looking back, it's as a business, you realize they were misunderstood for a long time, and it seems like they were okay with that, if not even intentional about that. So talk to us about that side of it, about the years when no one really knew the big plan.
I actually think, because Jeff loves to say that we have a willingness to be misunderstood. And I actually think that that's a little bit of rhetorical jujitsu. You just don't understand. What we're doing can't be understood. Actually, I think people understand it pretty well. It's just that he's making enormous bets that from the perspective of an outside observer may or may not pay off. But he's been so relentless and exacting, in his pursuit of building a larger business that they are paying off. So back in 2000, 2001. When there were analysts very publicly saying that the company was going to run out of money and go out of business like all the other dot-coms, it was actually very conceivable that that might happen. And as I describe in the book, if they hadn't raised a very fortuitous round of funding right before the market collapsed, and then also gone out and done the deal with these competitors, basically, if their competitors like Toys R Us hadn't been so short-sighted to start giving Amazon money to run their websites, then Amazon definitely would have gone out of business. And even today, people ask, how can you compete with Google and with Apple in the device business? Here are two companies that are vastly better capitalized and have more kind of indigenous knowledge in the device business. And look, and those are great questions. It's completely unclear to me and to many outside observers that the Kindle tablet can carve out a satisfying market share for Amazon. But he's relentless.
What are some of the failures that he and Amazon have had over the years?
I think they would even admit that there have been many. And one of the great things about the company is they're often willing to acknowledge them. They test everything a million times. They try a lot of things and experiment, and when they don't work, they stop. So a failure, I'll do a couple, from small to the large. So with the Kindle products, they try a lot of things. And I don't know if you remember, the Kindle 2 had this text-to-speech function that was going to kind of disrupt the audio book industry. So you bought a book, and you could turn it on, and it would read you the book with a mechanical or robotic voice. And the publishers complained, and customers didn't really use it, and now it doesn't exist anymore. I don't know if that's a failure, but they tried something and it didn't work. From product categories, you look at the jewelry business. Jeff spent a lot of time in 2003, worrying about the appearance of the Tiffany's-like Amazon box that was going to go to customers. I think they probably do a pretty good watch business now. But I don't think he spends any time thinking about the jewelry business anymore. It turned out to be probably not a great online business. And then, of course, probably the biggest set of failures occurs in the late 90s. And in the book, I call this chapter Fever Dreams, where he's just so overstimulated by the free access to capital that he kind of tries to build the vision all at once. He goes for the everything store right away, and they hire like crazy, and they raise like $2 billion in debt. I think actually Amazon's probably the most highly capitalized internet company in history. And it almost completely blows up in his face. And he almost goes from being Time Man of the Year at the end of 1999 to, I don't know what the opposite of this, the Piñata of the Year in 2002. And really, it's his CFO who subsequently leaves the company, a man named Warren Jensen, who raises that round of European financing at the very end of the dot-com boom. And the fact that his board members force him to hire a COO, a guy named Joe Galli, which is a little bit of a disaster, but an operator who comes in and starts to help clean things up, that they survive. And that, I think he would readily own up to making lots of mistakes in those years.
What do you think are the couple of biggest things that he and they have done right?
Well, there's a lot to choose from, because he's built a business that's going to bring in $75 billion this year, and they've done it in 19 years. So the whole story is one of incredible success, and of a founder who didn't just have the entrepreneurial vision, but the operating discipline to run this thing. When it was 3 guys in a garage to now 90,000 employees, and now they're hiring 70,000 temporary workers. So, to select a few things, I think two of the biggest have to be, because Amazon is by and large an e-commerce company, but in the year, let's say 2004, 2005, it kind of becomes apparent that he has selected one of the least inspiring business models of the new age, right? Google starts up in Silicon Valley and has its IPO in 2004, I think, and it's the valuation's many multiples of Amazon. And Google is just sucking engineers out of Amazon. They open their office in Kirkland. Everybody at Amazon's unhappy. And Jeff basically says, if we're going to get out of this, we're going to have to innovate our way out. And around the same time frame, they do 2 things. One, he correctly discerns that Apple, with the iPod, has seriously disrupted his own music business. So they look at the data, and they can see that CD sales are falling because people have bought the iPad, now iTunes is selling music. And he goes into a meeting, and of course I tell more of this history in the book, but he has been watching the ebook market for some time. They tried to do a deal with Rocketbook in the 1990s, an early ebook company. It didn't work out. But he goes into a meeting about 2004, and he says, we're going to build our own devices. And his senior leadership team says, you're crazy. Jeff Wilke, senior vice president, has a manufacturing background. Diego Piacentini comes from Apple. They know how bloody hardware can be, and they say, this is nuts, it's going to be distracting, we shouldn't do it. And he says, I know it's hard, we're going to make it work. And really, alone, Jeff against the world gives the green light to the Kindle business. So that's number one. And then number two is Amazon Web Services, which is remarkable. An e-commerce company, a retailer, building an enterprise business now that has essentially sparked the latest kind of tech boom and runs, is going to run the CIA servers. And that, is a very similar story. In this case, it's actually very inspired by a book. And I actually account in my book how almost every major decision at Amazon is a result of the reading culture there, how they get together and read books. And Jeff is great at, I think, just kind of implanting little pieces of wisdom, out of books he reads and applying them in the business. And in this case, they had read a book called Creation by a video game designer named Steve Grand. And he had talked about primitive building blocks and how artificial life can stem from primitives. And this is a leap that's hard to imagine, and I certainly couldn't have made it. But at the time, Jeff is thinking a lot about how to foster developer businesses at Amazon and how to open up the company a little bit to developers. And he comes back into a meeting and he says, if we really want to foster the alchemy of developers, we need to create primitives or building blocks. And that becomes Amazon Web Services, the primitives of compute and storage and payments. Again, and I think he would modestly say that all these inventions are collaborative and lots of people involved, and that's true to an extent. It's also true that a lot of these major decisions really spring from his creativity.
So that's an interesting parallel also to Steve Jobs and the fact of a leader being so deeply involved in product creation, and I think the culture that springs from that. So I guess talk a little bit more about the culture, because you talked about the kind of reading the memo at the beginning of every meeting, but what are some really unique culture aspects that are Amazon's alone, and how do they drive what the business has become? Well,
I'd say the comparison with Jobs is so interesting. I'll just spend a moment with that, because I think Jobs was more intuitive, right? Just kind of, had this sense for what people might want, and and pursued it, and didn't look at a lot of data. I mean, if he had looked at a lot of data, he would have said that the tablet market is kind of defunct, and there's no reason that Apple should create the iPad. And Jeff is incredible, and the company is so incredibly data-driven. So if he's looking at the data in 2004, he sees that Apple is disrupting the music business and that it's a full ecosystem of device and services. And there's really, you don't need a huge intuitive leap to think, this could happen in books, and it better be us. We have to protect our moat. We have to protect our core franchise, or someone else is going to do it. And the same thing with Amazon Web Services. So data-driven. You see, he saw inside the company that developers, Amazon's own developers, are having an incredibly hard time testing their products. They come into meetings and they say, here's our idea, but we couldn't test anything because we didn't have the infrastructure. And again, a small leap to say, well, if you create these primitives, then you're solving our problem, and maybe we could solve other companies' problems as well. So I think data is at the heart of Amazon's culture. And then, of course, this relentless and sometimes unpleasant drive from the founder to create a standard of excellence and to push, everyone to meet it. And so in the book, I have this one section which is sort of like, during the reporting of this book, I heard from a lot of employees that were saying, let me tell you what Jeff Bezos said to me in a meeting. It was brutal. And like my notebook was filling up with these, and you saw them in the book. It's like, is this the B team document? Where's the A team document? Or my favorite is someone will pitch him an idea, and he reads the document and says, do we have the right people working on this? And meanwhile, the person who's working on it's like standing right there. and it's unpleasant, and it's why Amazon is such an uncomfortable place to work. And it's also why it's such a successful company, because like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates at Microsoft or Spencer, no, just kidding. He insists on excellence and does not mince words when people aren't meeting his standards.
And what does that actually mean for people? Does he think then sort of along the way, the means to the end is that people are disposable along the way? Or what did you hear about that?
I don't think he. I mean, obviously, he would disagree that he feels that his people are disposable. I think probably he got a little desensitized in the late '90s, 2000, 2001, when almost everybody left his side. It's really remarkable. I mean, there are a couple of guys who show up in the late '90s and 2000, like Wilkie or Piacentini, who are still senior Amazon leaders today. But if you go back and you look at the executive team, they all left. Nobody believed in them. They all thought this is maybe a $50 billion a year business, or probably not even that. They probably honestly didn't even think the company was going to survive. And so he has seen so much turnover and so much churn, and he actually has built I think he's built a tolerance for that inside the company. So he loves, back to the books point, they've read all the Jim Collins books, and Good to Great, and Collins says that like you build a culture, and it's brutal, but build a culture of believers, and everyone else gets ejected like a virus. And I think that's pretty fair kind of description of what he's built at Amazon. It's like, are you a believer? Are you going to run as fast and as hard as Amazon requires you to? And if you do, and there are loyalists, and I've talked to many of them, then you end up actually loving the company. And I've talked to many people who fall into that category. And then there are others that maybe they want a different work-life balance, or maybe actually they feel it's too bureaucratic. I think there's lots of different experiences inside Amazon, and it probably depends who your manager is, and it might depend on how much attention Bezos is paying to your division as well. But I talked to plenty of people who left after 6 months or a year and felt like it was brutal and a gladiator culture. It'll be interesting to watch. I think they're going to have to slow down or tinker with that culture a little bit, because they're getting to be so big. And one thing we're seeing now is them opening offices in places like Detroit or Chicago. They're expanding their presence in San Francisco, where I'm from. And I think it's actually because here in Seattle, there's not a lot of mystery around the atmosphere there.
So a company like Zillow, 2 years post being public, growing very rapidly, we have very big, long-term dreams and ideas. What can we learn at this stage in our growth? What can we learn from Amazon and from Jeff's leadership?
I mean, I think there's a ton to learn from Amazon. I think one, I'll talk about two things. One is, the customer focus is, it sounds, it's a little hard to swallow as a journalist when a company tells you that they're customer focused, because obviously what companies can tell you, there's no customer focus here. But at Amazon, it really is remarkable the extent to which they are willing to slay kind of profitable aspects of their business if they decide that it creates a poor customer experience. And the fun story that I tell in the book is a couple of years ago, Amazon makes a lot of money on email marketing. So you maybe shop for something, but you don't buy it on Amazon, and no surprise, 2 days later you get an email advertising for that product category. And about 2 years ago, it came to Jeff's attention that people who had browsed but did not buy in the lubricant section of the website were getting emails for, in the sexual wellness category. And he was furious because he felt like that could be potentially embarrassing. And he walked into a meeting, and this is in the Businessweek excerpts, but he basically said, shut down the channel. Like, it's out of control.
Shut down the email channel.
Shut down the email channel. Shut down the email channel. It brings in $1 billion a year, which is roughly my educated estimate. But it's out of control. It's too decentralized. It's a poor experience. We can't control it, and it's potentially embarrassing our customers. And they talked him off the ledge, and they closed the email channel for that kind of health and wellness category. But he's essentially willing to kind of slice off an arm because, and look, I mean, I just flew up from San Francisco. And it's very, so when you're in an airplane, it's very easy to like differentiate between customer-focused businesses and non-customer-focused businesses. Like United is playing this advertisement as we're boarding, at top volume, and it's horrible. And if they had spent any time at all thinking about how this affected the customer, then they would be willing to sacrifice that revenue because it's a terrible experience. So that's number one, kind of being truly customer focused. And then number two, and this is probably more important, is thinking big and propelling, like relentlessly propelling and nurturing the company's inventiveness. And I think like there's something about the pace of change on the internet that you just can't stand still. And we've seen what happens to internet companies that stand still. I mean, it's Yahoo and it's AOL, and you lose your business and your competitors outpace you. Or startups come up and take your business. And Amazon is alone in that first set of internet companies because he never stood still. And he always said, we're going to keep building. And you see it where he spends his time right now. He audits the entire company, but he spends a lot of time on the Kindle and on the device and digital business. He spent the summer in San Francisco working at Lab 126, the hardware division, and it's Amazon Web Services. And it's because these are the parts of the business with the greatest pace of change.
What's your thought on his personal purchase of the Washington Post as a journalist,
Sure.
And did you see it coming?
Right. Well, I did not see it coming. I would love to say that I was all set with a chapter on the Washington Post purchase in the book, but that would not be the case. I was actually sort of sitting stunned at my computer as the news broke, with probably like a thin line of drool coming down my face, and then a wave of panic because I had to make a couple of changes in the book, and then actually sort of a wave of optimism because I realized, particularly for the East Coast of the United States, you can build a $61 billion business, and they really don't care. But you buy the hollowed Washington Post, and they're like, who is this man? So I actually think it's great news for leverage of the Washington Post and employees of the Washington Post because, here, as an employee of a newspaper, it's probably hard to imagine for you guys, but you are living in wallowing in such pessimism and like this aura of managed decline, and like I'm sure this is never true throughout the history of newspapers until basically the last couple of years, where everyone's talking about, did you hear about the ad revenue, and it's down again, and who's talking about and worrying about layoffs. And here, the Graham family, and the Washington Post as a public company was not faring well. And here they've been acquired by someone with incredibly deep pockets, a record of long-term thinking and experimentation, and someone who has now staked a very key part of his reputation to this success of this very public franchise. He is going to make it work. Now, I guess if I was an executive at the newspaper, I might worry that after the initial kind of euphoria fades, he will be installing his own people. But I actually think it's great for the paper and great for journalism in general that folks like Jeff and Pierre Omidyar are taking a deep interest in the media.
So it'll be interesting for the business side of the house and probably inject some new enthusiasm there. What about the editorial side of the house? Do you think there'd be any impact there? Because I think it is interesting that, I mean, for journalists like you, Amazon's PR team has always been notoriously tight-lipped. It doesn't work with the media a lot. And then now he's part of the media, or he owns part of the media.
I think he's not that ideological. I mean, he obviously has his issues. He was a proponent of single-sex marriage here in Washington State, but I actually don't see him exerting any kind of editorial force, even on the editorial board of the Washington Post. And also, of course, he'll know that will, given his prominence, that will be very closely scrutinized. So again, from the perspective of reporters, look, there are a lot of worse outcomes for media organizations now. I spent many years working at Newsweek magazine, which of course went through a number of different owners, and is now, I don't even actually know who it is, but it's some, I think, religious or right-wing ideological organization owns Newsweek. They've got something to worry about. But I don't think that it's really a concern with Jeff's ownership of the Post.
Okay, let's open it up for questions. Yep.
So, who does Amazon think their biggest competitors? Do they fear anybody? money? Because Walmart's actually changing their entire landscape. You know, and Amazon's going towards a more physical presence with kiosks and storage warehouses and locations, where obviously Walmart's going into software and huge, you know, web presence now. Do you feel that as a threat?
And let me just repeat that for the people who are watching this. You're asking about Amazon's biggest competitor and offline companies like Walmart.
You know, Amazon is actually, frankly, kind of an egotistical organization. I doubt that they really consider Walmart. I'm sure they, first of all, they watch it all, right? And they say they're customer focused, and that's true, but they're also incredibly competitor focused. And we've seen them really pursue lots of nascent competitors. But with Walmart, you know, I imagine that they probably have some conviction that, you know, what works online, you know, that established, entrenched physical retailers will continue to have a hard time matching their cost structure. I mean, that's the important thing. Like with all these discount retailers, you know, low prices are, you know, like directly proportional to the cost structure. And Walmart has, you know, these assets and all of these different sets of inventory sprinkled around the world. And Amazon, you know, started with one set of inventory, and now it maybe has, you know, 70 in the United States. But it's like, you know, like a vastly better cost structure. And you know, what Walmart is doing is trying to kind of turn that liability into an advantage by using the stores as fulfillment nodes. And we'll see, but there's nothing really in the last, you know, 14 years of competition that suggests that, you know, Walmart can be as significant a player online as Amazon. So I suspect that they, you know, see their chief rivals as Apple and Google, particularly on, you know, competition for, you know, in the digital ecosystem. And then Amazon's primary rival has always been its own complexity and chaos, you know, because unlike Apple, you know, they make one beautiful device, and as their customer base scales, you know, they don't necessarily get more complex. Foxconn does, right? They've got to make more of them. But Amazon's business at 10 billion, at 40 billion, at 50 billion, and you know, tomorrow at 100 billion in sales, it always, you know, it has to keep changing. You know, they're in the business of getting products from point A in these fulfillment centers to point B, and it's incredibly complex. And at every stage of the company, they've had to kind of refigure out their own organization. And you know, for a lot of internet companies, that's kind of a cultural and an organizational challenge. And Amazon has that as well, and is having all sorts of growing pains around that. But they also have to kind of refigure out the science behind their business every time they grow. So I actually think that it's probably one of the reasons why they're so quiet and secretive, is because they're so immersed in the complexity of their own business. And so I actually see that as their primary challenge.
I've got a question via text from one of our other offices. There was an interesting article last year in the Seattle Times about Amazon's lack of philanthropy and how they have contributed relatively nothing to the community. It was a big front page article last year.
Right.
Can you speak about why that is, what in their philosophy is driving that, and has anything changed since then?
To the second part of the question, I think they may have acknowledged it in some small ways and improved their matching program. But I think, you know, to the first question, I'll just go back to something I said, which is, you know, for any discount retailer, your ability to set low prices is directly proportional to your cost structure. And they, you know, that's why they're frugal across the board. And that was Jeff reading Sam Walton's autobiography in 1996. And in the Amazon values, which are posted on the Amazon site, you know, basically taking, I think, two of those right from Walton's autobiography, one being frugality and another being bias for action. And so, you know, it's actually a fair kind of area for criticism because they don't do a lot. And that's because they are so relentless about, you know, creating this cost structure where they can, you know, build discount retail on top of.
Allie.
So I'm a big user of Amazon Prime and Amazon Moms and all those things, but lately I've noticed they've been cutting back or doing add-on deals or things like that. Has Amazon bitten off more than they can chew with that? I mean, literally, I've had a couch, a barbecue delivered for no cost.
And you feel like they're scaling back on the discounts?
It seems like, yeah, they're kind of coming back
Right.
just a bunch of things that are happening, and it seems like over the past year, it's really
Interesting. Well, I actually tell the story in the book of Amazon's competition with diapers.com. And Amazon Mom actually springs up as a way to, outflank this competitor that was doing a very good job, with moms and households, an area that Amazon hadn't kind of traditionally been all that strong in. And, like the competition with Zappos, where they created endless.com, Amazon Mom started as a way to kind of outflank a competitor and use Amazon's scale and might and resources to kind of bleed dry this upstart. And of course, Amazon ends up buying diapers.com, or Quidsy was the name of the company. And then almost immediately, actually, they shut down Amazon Mom. And the FTC was reviewing the deal, and they probably saw that the theatrics of it were a little bad, and they opened it back up with scaled back discounts. And I haven't followed closely what they're doing with pricing, but it wouldn't surprise me. I'm sure the level of deals always fluctuate, and who knows? Maybe these are levers that the company pulls as they get more visibility on a quarter, or the overall profitability of the retail business. I guess I would.
But in an example like that, I mean, it's an interesting question. They created a consumer category around moms versus diapers.com, which was doing very well at the time. They undercut them. I think you wrote in the book about how they built a pricing engine to match and undercut every price change diapers.com made, so they could kind of squash them. So they bought them. Does the consumer get lost in that? Because now there's no more, or as Ali's saying, she's not seen as much innovation or discounts on behalf of the mom.
And the FTC looked at that very closely and ultimately concluded that there were enough other diaper sellers online that it didn't result in a monopoly. But it's something that, as Amazon becomes more monolithic in some of these categories like books, they're going to have to be very careful about the pricing mechanism.
So it sounds like most of what you've said so far is that Amazon is Jeff Bezos, right? So horrible scenario if he's not around anymore. Is there anybody at the company that can take and run with it, or is it going to rise and fall on this?
And let me just repeat that question. Successor to Jeff Bezos, what happens if he's gone?
And that's a great question, and it's probably, if I'm an investor in Amazon, that would kind of be right at the top of the list of worries. Now, he's not going anywhere. He's going to turn 50 years old in January, probably decades ahead of him running Amazon. But is there anyone as versatile to run a company that includes not only a retail business, but a digital business, a hardware business, an enterprise business? And I don't know what the answer to that question is. Now, there is that component of the leadership team that has been at Amazon for a while, and so you have Andy Jassy, who runs AWS, who was a shadow of Jeff's. So for 2 years, he just followed Jeff around to every meeting and went on every trip, and was kind of a chief of staff. And Jeff Wilkie, who came from Allied Signal in '99 and basically saved rescued the fulfillment centers from chaos and built something that continues to thrive today. And he runs the North American consumer business. And Diego Piacentini, who came from Apple. These are guys who actually I sort of have a phrase in the book that called Jeff bots. And it's sort of, I'm having a little fun. They probably don't love that phrase, but it's, people that have like internalized Jeff's mannerisms and way of thinking and say the same stuff he says, and they really have been trained. And so, maybe one or a combination of those guys, if it were to happen somehow tomorrow. But as I said, I would foresee him. Again, he said the story was too early to tell. I mean, his goal is the biggest company in the world, most likely, or at least Walmart scale. So I would guess, at least he's got at least 20 years at Amazon.
Here's a question from a text. What is Jeff's goal with his space company, Blue Origins, and did you get an opportunity to talk to him about it?
I have talked to him about it in the past, and I tell this, actually, I wrote the very first story on Blue Origin, and I'm almost embarrassed to say I tell this story in the book where I sort of felt like if there was going to be a full accounting across the board, I should have my own confessions. Where in 2003, I actually wrote the first story about Blue Origin in Newsweek by flying to Seattle. I'd heard about it, and go into his warehouse in South Seattle and actually, I can't even bring myself to say this, digging through the trash.
Oh my God.
I'm going to chalk it up to youthful exuberance. And then in the book, we have an email exchange about it. The goal is to lower the cost of getting to space, and probably more personally to bring Jeff up into space. Actually, I did talk to him about it, and he said he definitely wants to go. And then I asked his mom about it. I asked her if she was nervous, and she clearly was, but she said, "Ask me again if it ever happens." But like Elon Musk and Richard Branson, John Carmack, the creator of Doom, they all have this is the Star Trek generation, and they've got the resources, and they're pursuing their dreams.
I just saw Gravity this last weekend. I don't know if that'll
I'm not
impact.
going.
I don't know if that'll impact people
Yeah.
wanting to go into space, but it was scary. Yeah, Aaron.
Do you know if Jeff has read your book?
I don't know, but I sent him a copy before it came out, and no, I haven't heard from him.
And you and I were talking before this started. I mean, being here in Seattle this week, like, are you going to Amazon? Do you?
Well, I brought my mother for personal protection. So you can wave. Yep. And I actually wanted to do. They call them fish bowls at Amazon, and but they said, of course, that naturally they wanted to read it. So I haven't heard back about that. I'm still hopeful that it would happen.
Yeah.
So this is from a friend in a different office as well. So given the amount of discussion there is about employees not liking Amazon, why do they still get such great employees? Why did they end up choosing to go to Amazon over their competitors instead?
So the question is, given how much some people don't like working there, how do they retain such great people and acquire such great people?
I'd say two things. One, again, experiences differ. I mean, I'm not ready to say that everyone's experience at Amazon is horrible. I think there are many people that flourish there, and they've got 90,000 employees, and so and it's an incredible company, an incredible brand, and like working at Zillow. I mean, there's no way to have a greater, your impact is magnified. And of course at Amazon it's very decentralized, and you're likely to, to have more responsibility than you might elsewhere. And then the second thing is the share price, right? I mean, it's been on an incredible rocket ride and continues to go up, and has recently set new records. I think that can be a Band-Aid on many wounds.
Let's do like two more questions. Yeah.
What's the story behind the question mark from Jeff when he emailed out?
Question mark when Jeff emails out. What's that about?
Question mark email. So if you're an Amazon employee and you get an email from the CEO, probably any of the senior execs, with and all it has is a question mark. It's a forward of another email. The first thing you do is you immediately cancel all your plans for probably the next week, and you might maybe dive under the desk. And it's actually Bezos's way. They're called escalations. Of all of our Amazon employees, has anyone ever gotten a question mark email? So there are a few. It's his way of auditing the entire organization. So maybe customer service has forwarded him a complaint, or he's gotten one directly to his public email address, and it's the music app isn't working on my Android phone. It might be something as simple as that, and he will just forward it. Another thing that it is it's him he does this very well, obviously, very efficiently dispersing his time and magnifying his impact. So it's very economical. It's just a question mark, and he forwards it to the proper executive or employee, and you get it, and immediately you age 10 years. And you're required to fix the problem right away and report back to a series of executives, and then it'll kind of get back to the CEO. It's a way of kind of allowing the customer voice into the organization and complementing the data.
Lloyd.
So can you talk about your opinion of how Amazon's relationship with other businesses and partners has kind of evolved over time? Because originally, with their focus on consumers, they always view kind of other businesses just a means to an end, and they're going to just get as low cost as they can. And when they were building other companies' websites, that didn't go very well at all. The relationship with Toys R Us ended very poorly. But now that they're selling a lot more of
How has Amazon's relationship with businesses changed over time?
How is Amazon as a partner? I think that the evidence remains that Amazon as a partner to other large companies is always a terrible result, right? I mean, Jeff probably has a sort of hierarchy. Who knows if it's written down anywhere? But it's customers first, and maybe investors and employees, and like sort of maybe the civic good is there, with sales tax and other companies. I mean, it's not at the top. With Toys R Us or Target or Borders or Expedia, it's all, the outcome has always been terrible. And it's because Amazon is so focused on the mechanics of its own business and of catering to customers that it tends to run roughshod over partners. And even when you see it kind of investing in startups, the outcomes tend to be bad. So, go talk to the founder of Woot. He's and there are many others. They often feel kind of abused. I tell the story of Love Film in Europe, where Amazon makes a strategic investment, and then later the partners want to take the company public, and Amazon says, we're more interested in buying you, and then leverages and negotiates like mad and leverages a good deal for itself. But to your point, Amazon as a platform for developers and other small retailers, obviously the web services business has lifted up many industries. And then I would say its marketplace platform, there the relationship gets a little bit trickier. And that's because third-party retailers always find themselves competing with Amazon's first-party business and complain that the mechanics of pricing on the site are tilted toward Amazon. So it still hasn't, it's so inwardly focused that it still can be a very difficult company to collaborate with.
Great. Well, Brad's being incredibly generous with his time today, in that he's here to sign copies of books. And Jeannie, for the remote offices, are we drawing names or is it under chairs? Okay, so we're drawing names from remote offices. There's a number of you who have got a free book that Brad is going to sign it. If you're here in Seattle, look under your chair. You might have gotten a free book, and Brad is here to sign it. And if you don't have your book yet, you know where to buy it on Amazon. Yay! Brad, thank you so much.
Thanks, Amy.